Hey Phone Dog viewers, Beau here, and if you're looking for two of the best budget smartphones currently on the market, well, you've come to the right place. Because in my hands, I have the $130 Moto E smartphone and the recently announced $120 BLU Studio C Mini smartphone. Both phones are similarly spec'd, so let's go ahead and put them head to head and see which phone comes out on top. Okay, so if we take a look at the hardware of each device, we'll notice right away that the Moto E is considerably smaller than the BLU Studio C Mini, as it has a 4.3-inch 540 by 960 resolution display, giving it a 256 pixel per inch index. But bigger isn't always better, as yeah, the Mini has a larger 4.7-inch display, but the resolution is only 800 by 480 pixels, translating to a lower 198 pixel per inch index. So in terms of specs, it's not quite as pixel packed as the Moto E. But if we take a look around the two devices, we'll see they're relatively similar, as they both have the power, sleep, on-off, and volume controls on either side of the device. And you'll find the microUSB charging port and 3.5mm headphone jack on both sides of the phones as well. The Mini does have physical navigation buttons on the bottom of the phone for the menu, back, and home commands, compared to the software buttons on the Moto E, and the Mini does have a 2-megapixel front-facing camera. Now if we flip the two devices over, we'll see both devices have a 5-megapixel rear-facing camera with a flash on the BLU Mini. And these two phones are primarily made of plastic. I mean, they're so cheap they pretty much have to be. But as I hold both phones in my hands, I have to say the Moto E definitely feels better in the hands, since Motorola has added a soft touch coating on the back to give it some more grip. I mean, the Studio C Mini has a very slick plastic back cover that just doesn't offer as much grip, and it just feels a lot cheaper in the hands compared to the Moto E. But both devices have slots for a microSD card for expandable storage, but only the BLU Studio C Mini has the option to remove and replace the battery pack. And so if we power on the two devices and take a look at how everything looks on the software side of things, you'll start to notice the pixel density difference, like I mentioned earlier, of the two displays. The Moto E looks a little bit more crisp and vivid than the BLU Mini, but you do get more real estate with the Mini, so it's definitely a trade-off you'd have to weigh yourself if you're considering buying one of these devices. But the software on the two phones are almost identical in that they're running essentially stock Android 4.4 KitKat out of the box. I mean, there are some very minor Motorola features thrown on top of stock Android on the Moto E, but they're very minor. I mean, really what differentiates the two devices is how they perform, since the Studio C Mini has a quad-core 1.3 GHz processor with 1GB of RAM, while the Moto E has a dual-core Snapdragon 200 processor clocked at 1.2 GHz with 1GB of RAM. And so the Mini definitely does have a slight advantage, as the overall experience is much more smooth and responsive. I mean, stock Android KitKat does do a great job running on devices with low-end specs, as you can see, but the quad-core processor really does help create a more fluid experience than the dual-core Moto E. You'll be able to multitask better and navigate your device smoother, because I mean, 4 cores are better than 2, it's that simple. And since the Mini doesn't push quite as many pixels as the Moto E, it further adds to the overall performance of the device. So that too is something you want to keep in mind. But if we take a look at the camera and compare the two devices in terms of quality, surely you won't be too impressed, since these are bottom of the barrel 5-megapixel camera sensors. The quality is just so-so. Images don't come close to competing with high-end smartphone camera sensors, since the images lack a lot of sharpness and color accuracy. But hey, for a $120 phone, you really can't complain. At least Motorola and BLU included a camera, right? I mean, if I had to pick a winner between the two, I guess I'd give the winner to BLU, since it does have a flash on the back, but honestly guys, they perform very similarly in this department. As do they perform similarly in battery life. I mentioned both devices run stock Android 4.4 KitKat, which greatly improves battery life, so they're fairly even in that regard. And they both have almost identical battery capacities, as the Moto E has a 1980 mAh battery, while the BLU Studio C Mini has a 2000 mAh battery. But since the Mini has 4G HSPA Plus and a quad-core processor, I've noticed it does die faster than the Moto E, even though it has a larger display. But since the Mini has 4G HSPA Plus and a quad-core processor, I have noticed it does die faster than the Moto E. But realistically, you shouldn't have any problem getting a full day out of use of either of the two devices, But if you're skeptical because you use your phone a lot, then the Moto E might be the better choice simply because it can hold a charge a little bit longer. But at the end of the day, if we take a look at these devices, both are very similar. While the BLU Studio C Mini was recently announced and the Moto E has been out for some time now, both are very solid devices, especially if you're looking to spend less than $150. But considering the fact that the BLU Studio C Mini is technically $10 cheaper and packs slightly better specs and is 4G compatible, I'd have to recommend it over the Moto E, unless you value the soft touch plastic build quality and slightly better display over the other higher end specs on the Mini. And so that is my comparison between these two devices. I know BLU is still a relatively new company compared to Motorola, so let me know what you think of these two devices and how they compare by leaving me a comment down below. And so with that said, I'm Beau HD from PhoneDog.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya.